the Pupil Services Committee meeting. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the health and safety plan for phased school reopening. This is a very important and time-sensitive topic that the committee needs to work through. We will allow public comment on this item if time permits at the end of the meeting. We also understand and fully acknowledge that we have equally important topics to discuss, including developments over the last 24 hours that led to the resignation of Mr. Minor. We have a regular board meeting this Monday where we will address it and encourage you all to attend. There will be an opportunity for public comment at that meeting as well. So I think I'm gonna tee it over to you then, Dr. Marchini. Oh, I think you're muted still. There you go.
All right, sorry about that. So this is the phased school reopening health and safety plan, and this portion of the plan is the summer programming health and safety plan. And what that means is it's for instructional and non-instructional activities. So some of the instructional would be our extended year program. We'd have driver's education. We could have SAT boot camp, kinder camp. And then also there are PIAA sports, and we're receiving some guidelines on training and practices for those. So there's quite a lot of things going on across the district, but we have to have this plan in place and approved by the board to start to phase in those activities starting July 1st and would run to August 20th. There's a number of different portions of this plan that we're going to review tonight. Just briefly, the type of reopening, key strategies, things like cleaning, sanitizing, social distancing, monitoring students' health, training, professional development for our staff, and of course, for those instructional areas, how we're actually going to have on-campus instruction with virtual options so that everybody can be included. So I'm going to kind of put it over to Dr. Lloyd, who was able to write this plan rapidly over the last few days. And with, quite a bit of input from different administrators, stakeholders, teachers, etc. Dr. Lloyd?
Thank you, Dr. Marchini. Mr. San Francisco is going to bring the document up on the screen so anybody in the audience will be able to see the plan. So as you know, the governor released his preliminary guidelines for school districts for a phased reopening. And this is the template that school districts were asked to utilize. School districts can reopen beginning on July 1st, but in order to be able to reopen, they have to develop a health and safety plan. So this is our draft. So board members, as we are going through this, if you would identify areas of questions that you have, we'll stop at each of the categories and have a chance for your questions and to make adjustments to the plan. So the very first thing that we're going to have to do is change the title of our plan. We had met the other day with Mrs. Prophet and Mrs. DiMarino to discuss our summer programming health and safety plan, and just yesterday the governor mandated school districts to have an athletic plan also. So this is going to need to be our summer programming and athletic health and safety plan. When we did review this, Mrs. Prophet and Mrs. DiMarino, we had already included athletics, anticipating that we would be required to do so. But we are going to have to rename our plan for those purposes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
With his announcement, was there any changes that we needed to make to athletics, or do we think we have everything covered?
No, I will show you when we get there. We inserted a hyperlink to the more detailed guidelines. So we have to have our procedures for O&J, and then we must implement other guidelines. So we will link to those, and we'll be able to bring those up on the screen for you to see. All right, so let's take a look at what our plan is that is specific for O&J, and it's important for anybody that's watching to understand that this is the plan from July 1st to August 20th. This is not the plan for the fall. We would like to be able to get our athletics started on January 1st, driver's ed, credit recovery courses for high schoolers, as Dr. Marchini said, kinder camp, jumpstart, and of course, ESY for our special education population. So the type of reopening that we are looking at for July 1st is a total reopen for all students and staff, but some students and their families have the ability to opt for distance learning out of the safety and health and concern for their students. And so that is, this plan will includes that. All right, so Mr. Sanfrancesco, if we go to the next part of the plan must identify who was the coordinating team, who wrote the plan, who will be monitoring the plan. And so this list will continue to grow as people are added. Today we added feedback from kinder camp teachers and ESY teachers and athletics. And so we will be adding the names of the teachers that contributed to the plan before Monday night. So this is the draft of the plan. This is not the actual final document. You'll see as we go through the plan, the key strategies that and procedures that we needed to take into consideration if we're in the yellow phase and if we move into the green phase. And I anticipate that we will open under yellow and move to green. It's possible we could move to green before we start the plan, but most likely, based on today's news, Chester County may still be in the yellow. All right, so we come to the very first category, and this category was developed with input from our Director of Facilities and our CFO, Jackie Crumrine, as well as our Director of Transportation. And so this has to do with the cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, and ventilation. These are the procedures that we had already put in place back when the pandemic was first declared and we were still in school. And so I know I had shared this information with the board back then. And so this formalizes it in this document regarding what we are doing now before we open our buildings. And then the plan talks about what we're doing now for school buses before we begin transporting students for summer programs. And then it goes on to the daily cleaning and sanitizing of our schools. The biggest change to this part of the plan is that we will be adding housekeeping staff to day shifts. So each school, in addition to their maintenance worker, will, the elementaries will each now have a member of the housekeeping staff moved from second shift to first shift. The middle school will have 2 of these people, and the high school will also have 2. And the purpose of this is to have ongoing daily cleaning throughout the course of the day on high touch surfaces. Naturally, we've always cleaned cafeterias. We don't use them in the summer for our summer programs, but we will need to be cleaning and sanitizing the areas where children will be learning throughout the day. And then we would continue that also in the green phase. Any questions, board members, about this part of the plan?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I see that the ventilation practices for school buses.
Yes.
Was there any concern about ventilation for just regular classrooms that needed to be looked at, or any kind of other indoor spaces?
I'm happy to answer that if you'd like, Dr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mrs. Crumrine.
Sure. We note in the plan that we will follow the ASHRAE standards, and they are recommending that we do run air, the intake, and that we're purging the buildings every night too. So we're fully removing the air and putting fresh air into the buildings. So it will have a little bit of an impact on utility costs, but it is what ASHRAE is recommending right now. So that's a good question.
Is that a different procedure than we've had in the past? Do we utilize that in March or?
Yes, we did utilize that in March. Prior to March, we didn't purge as much as we're purging now. So we're still required to have a specific level of outdoor air in the system and into the buildings. We're just stepping that up
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thanks.
from pre-COVID.
Just a quick question on with the daily cleaning, job aids and sign-offs, like, you know, when you go to, let's say, a public restroom somewhere and it says this was inspected at this time or this, will there be, is there a requirement with any of this from CDC, or will we have job aids with what time things were done? So, you know, everybody feels comfortable, staff and parents, that, you know, each of the areas have been done on that regular cycle.
Yes, absolutely. We will have those posted specifically in the restrooms. And we're doing that this summer as well in the office areas. So there's a checkoff and there is a sign off. So we will be implementing that.
Thank
We
you.
have that right now, so that everybody could see that came back to work last week. They were able to see that their area had been cleaned, so they knew that they were entering into an area that was disinfected.
Yep.
So we'll continue that practice. We do that every year with our summer cleaning in order to keep track of that all the spaces have been cleaned. Any other questions for this particular area? All right, let's move on to the social distancing and other safety protocols. This is the area that you hear a lot about in the news about how are schools going to achieve these recommendations from the CDC. And so we will be achieving them to the maximum extent feasible. And so we're going to, this part will go a little slower through this particular section. We've divided this into two parts for elementary schools and then the secondary schools. Each of these sections has you start with questions that you are to consider. And so we needed to talk about how spaces would be organized, how would we work with groups of students throughout the school days, how we would manage our communal spaces, utilize outdoor spaces, hygiene routines, and how we will adjust transportation to meet social distancing requirements. We'd have to address visitors and volunteers, other safety protocols that may be specific to the age group of students, which stakeholders need to be trained as well. And so because in the yellow phase, everybody knows that we're limited to 25 people in a space. And so the plan, states that we would separate the desks 6 feet and that we would not exceed 25 individuals. It's 25 students in a classroom. When we are instructing in small group, because so much of ESY is in small group and it's in close proximity to each other. So we will have plexiglass panels. So for example, if we have a speech therapist working with the student, there will be a plexiglass panel, or if a teacher's working with a small group of students, there would be a plexiglass panel between the teacher and the students. We have already, in addition to ordering face masks for our staff, we are ordering those clear visors that you're seeing doctors wear. And the reason for this is because students need to see their teacher's mouth when they're speaking, that it is not feasible for a teacher to cover their mouth and teach. So we will be putting those shields. It's possible that we will have teachers, of our older students have masks under them, but for ESY, where we're talking about special education students, kinder camp, we're talking about kindergartners, and Jumpstart, where we're talking about students that are struggling in reading and math, the teachers will have their face shields and plexiglass. we do not use the cafeteria during this time, so we don't really need to address that. We do have some thinking in here already on the green phase. If we were to come back in the fall, just to capture thinking about what that might look like, but this is not the plan for the fall. This is the plan for the summer. Our hygiene practices are going to vary. With young children, you can stop everything and you can wash hands when they arrive in the morning and after they've had a snack and lunch and recess. That becomes a little bit more challenging with secondary students. So we will be encouraging the students to do that. The teachers will be encouraging that. We will be asking our students to come with their own water bottles because we will be cutting off the drinking fountains so that students are not putting their mouths on that. And water bottles can be refilled at our water bottle filling stations. We've begun outfitting all of our buildings with signs regarding protecting yourself against COVID-19, washing hands. We had some of those signs in place, but we did not have the signs about wearing masks. So we're in the process of adding those. In the yellow phase, we will not be utilizing the playground for students, even though our playgrounds are open and they've been open through this whole entire pandemic so that families could have a safe place to go and play. But we would not be doing that during the yellow phase. There would not be any shared equipment on the playgrounds. If we move to green, then we would be considering allowing children to play in those spaces. Again, we will be looking at limiting student sharing supplies. That's a very common thing, particularly in elementary schools, not as common in the older grades, but we will be not allowing that to occur in either the yellow or green phase this summer. Library books, if we are utilizing the school libraries this summer, once they are checked out and come back, they'll need to be sanitized and sit for 3 days. We will be staggering students coming and going from buildings, staggering the times that they're in hallways to minimize contact with each other and school personnel. Then when classrooms are empty, because when students have left the classroom, perhaps to go for physical education, then school personnel will be there to sanitize the classroom once the students are no longer in it. As far as adjusting transportation, we have collaborated with our transportation provider. They are, I thought Mrs. Crumrine was very impressive. The training that our transportation provider has had and are providing to their bus drivers regarding the spacing of students. We believe that we can transport safely 24 students on a bus. That's 1 student in each seat, with the 3rd window being open for that ventilation that we talked about, and that will be enough distance between students because that's what's feasibly possible. Special area classrooms in the yellow, the teachers will come to the students at the elementary level, and we will limit the location of staff meetings and any professional development to either virtual, small groups, or if we have larger settings such as auditoriums, we would be able to do that. We will not be having a child's place on site during the summer. We do have some notes in here about them during the yellow and the green phase, but we have been notified since putting this plan together that they will not be using our facilities. And so we'll have to continue to monitor the plan. Any questions about what social distancing will look like for elementary age children during the summer? We'll talk about secondary students here in a minute.
I've got a couple. I want to ask the hot button question. I know it's kind of addressed later in here, but are we going to require elementary students to wear masks?
No. Our transportation provider, you want to talk about that, Mrs. Crumrine?
Sure. Our transportation provider will definitely have the driver, and there will be a bus monitor, and they will both be wearing masks and gloves. The students will request that they wear them on the school bus, but it will not be mandated because there will be many students who will not be able to do that. And we understand that, and the transportation provider understands that too.
Particularly with the students that this plan is targeted for. It is not feasible oftentimes for students with disabilities to wear masks. And so we will not be requiring them to wear masks. I think that, and I would be happy to hear what the rest of the board thinks about this, is that is going to need to be a parent choice if their child wears a mask or not.
And just speaking from the special education aspect of it, I mean, there are so many kids with sensory issues. My own child won't wear a mask. So, you know, I think it's going to be a huge challenge. And I think when the CDC put that guideline out there, it really scared parents and sending them back. And I think it's been a hot button issue. And I think we've addressed it nicely.
I think that, Mrs. Prophet, we have to keep reminding our families that if they're not comfortable with that, we have the online option to be able to offer them for ESY, and we know that some parents aren't comfortable with that, but I recognize that if we try to enforce children wearing masks, that's all the teacher will do is enforce wearing masks, and no teaching will happen. What other questions did you have or
so
comments?
Just one other question, and maybe this is just a comment for teachers and building principals. I know we're requiring students to bring their own water bottles just in case students, and I'm thinking in terms of supplies in general, maybe we keep a stock of supplies for students in case they forget their water bottle so that they don't go the day without, you know, something. I'm sure teachers will come up with something for them, but just something to think about.
We already have a plan for that, actually.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
There are paper cups, disposable paper cups available.
Awesome.
Okay. And we always have to be mindful of our low-income families. Yep. But you're right, those that forget.
I had two quick questions on the capacity issue with the 6 feet apart desks. You know, like a 4x4 configuration, you know, or that's 16 seats and 24 feet by 24 feet. What's the capacity of our classrooms? Like, what's the realistic, how many kids are going to be in a class based on the 6 foot apart stuff? And are we going to be kind of spreading out using more classes than we normally would because of that? And then the other question was just on the busing. Do we have shields on the bus if they're one at a time? Like, is there any, or are we kind of, it's just one at a time on the bus seats?
So with regards to your question about the classrooms, and then I'll let Mrs. Crumrine answer the question about the buses. The benefit of ESY is that there's small groups of students that will be coming into the schools. So 6 feet apart is feasible. And that's during the yellow or the green phase in the summer. 6 feet apart is not going to be feasible when we return to school.
Understood. Okay. That makes
right.
sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
But we'd still have distance. There would still be distance, and sometimes, you know, when you visited classrooms, that you will see desks pushed together in a square, or even pushed together, you know, like as if it's a long dining room table or something, where desks will be separated and be facing front. Sure. Mrs. Cameron, you want to answer the question about the buses?
Right. Many of our students in the summer actually have specialized transportation arrangements that are in their IEP, and we follow those, and it is often many more less than 24 per bus. At this point, we don't have any plans, and the contractor doesn't have any plans for any plexiglass in the school buses. And when we are not running specialized transportation, the way that it will work is we will have a bus monitor to ensure that all of the students remain facing forward. They will be one per seat, but they will be staggered. So like, let's say seat 1 next to the window, seat 2 next to the aisle. And we'll, of course, if there's not 24 students on a bus, we'll space them out more.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
All right, just a couple of things to highlight.
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is a
With
challenge
regard,
when we don't have grid view. When we're presenting something, we don't see all the board members. I'm sorry.
yeah. Hopefully this is easily handled. I know that, you know, it specifies for teachers when they're engaging in one-on-one time that they can do a mask, or I'm sorry, the shield instead of a mask. Is that provision also in place for one-to-one aides?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure it was clear from the document, but
Okay.
if it,
I'm not
It
sure.
does-
I noticed, I see on the very first part of it, we will make a note to make sure that that's clear because that is
yeah,
supposed to be throughout. Okay, thank you.
excellent, thanks.
So when we look at middle and high school, we again have small groups of students that come in the high school for the programs that we will be offering this summer. And we will, for the most part, we don't use the cafeteria for eating. What we use that for our large group other type of activities that we'd be doing, not for eating. I see that we need to make there's a correction there that we're going to need to make on that plan because it's looking like it's reading as if we're serving lunch and we are not in the cafeterias in ESY. Again, I mentioned this, that hygiene is going to be a challenge for us, no doubt, at the secondary level, a little bit easier in the summer with ESY students because there's less students and their teachers are able to do more in terms of encouraging, actually taking them, you know, to the sink and working with them on their hygiene, and that's a normal part of ESY. Not quite the same. We will have disinfectant wipes available as well. Water bottles here, signs. I neglected to mention in both across the district, we will not be permitting visitors in the building, not visitors, volunteers in the buildings. We do have to permit some visitors because we could have somebody coming in to make a repair, but we won't be permitting visitors in the sense of, say, guest lecturers at either level, and we won't be permitting volunteers. You'll recall back in March that we had discontinued volunteers at one point. So we will not in the yellow phase. Once we get into the green phase, then we will be looking to reinstate volunteers because we certainly need their assistance across the district. In the secondary level, this is where you start to see how we would utilize the gym partitions in order to have less students, you know, to make smaller groups in a gymnasium. We would be discouraging the sharing of equipment. And if we are sharing equipment, then we will be sanitizing the equipment. We are looking to make sure that we've got adequate supplies so that we can limit that sharing of equipment. There's a number of things. The plan doesn't address this, but that was the purpose of the COVID funds that school districts received, so that if we need plexiglass dividers, if we need those face shields, that those funds were intended for us to purchase those things. And so if we don't have enough equipment for PE, we will be able to purchase more of those things. The sharing of materials at the high school level, there are definitely materials that they will be sharing, such as in labs. Those will be cleaned before the next group of students. It's a little bit easier to manage at the high school because the students can assist with cleaning off something before they use it. Passing between classes is going to be tricky, but at ESY we don't have as many students, and so we will be able to reduce those numbers of students in the halls. During the summer, we will be having students report directly to their first period class, that way to avoid that congregating that takes place in the morning. Students will be disappointed that they won't be able to hang out with their friends in the yellow or the green phase, that they will need to go directly to their class. We will be limiting the number of people in our LGIs, and if we move into the green, we'll be able to have 250. There will be no assemblies during the yellow phase, but during the green phase, we could still have assemblies, just we'd have to limit it to 250. We will be looking at scheduling and limiting where it is feasible for us to limit the number of students in a class. Our principals are working on that at this time. And throughout the process, we will be reassessing and adjusting. So I imagine that we will keep coming back to this committee throughout the school year to revise. I was just listening to a child care center today talk about how within days of implementing their plan, they had to revise. What questions do you have about the secondary level before we look at athletics?
I just have one question about visitors.
Yes.
Visitors will be required to wear masks?
Yes.
Okay.
So if we have somebody come in, say they come in to repair a system in the building, they will be required to wear masks. All of our buildings are already posted with those signs. And one of my recent emails told parents about right now making appointments. So we will continue to encourage our parents to make appointments. We won't prevent somebody from coming if they just show up. But yes, everybody will have to have a mask.
Okay.
Anybody else? Since I can't see everybody?
No.
Yes, no, okay. All right, let's take a look. We're now on the athletic part. It says middle and high school athletics. This is the latest information that just came out in the last press conference by the governor. We will be able to start voluntary, non-contact drills. Coaches often do this pre-season type of conditioning activities for their teams on a voluntary basis. And so we will be able to start this. We're going to be one of the very few to be able to start bringing back our athletes. And that has to do with the timing of our school board meeting. So as you're hearing this about other districts not being able to start athletics as early as we are, it has to do with the timing of their board meeting and when they can get this plan approved. What I want to draw your attention to right away is this hyperlink. And I know that Mr. Sanfran has to pop out and go to that link and then come back in. The PIAA has their own guidelines. And so their guidelines, on some occasions are going to trump these guidelines. So let me give you an example. In the yellow phase, the PIAA will not permit school districts to have spectators. And so that will trump the guidance from the high school athletic and activities from this foundation. But primarily, this is the directives that all athletic directors have received, all coaches receive, and this gives very specific details down to the different phases there, Mr. Sanfran. is where I want to draw their attention. School districts must first put in place their plan, and we'll go back to that part of it. But this is the very detailed plan about the phases. And so this is that pre-workout screening. They have to determine, are the student athletes symptom-free? And are the coaches symptom-free? There's the limiting of the gatherings that we see. PIAA will allow 25. This allows 10. And so we will follow the PIAA. In that case, in areas where PIAA didn't define, then we will use this. It talks about the facility cleaning in great detail, about appropriate clothing and equipment, the cleaning of those things. Notice it says students must be encouraged to shower and wash their workout clothing as when they get home, not here at our facilities. So very detailed, very specific about athletic equipment, how that is to be handled. So I wanted to bring your attention to this. All we need to do in our plan is reference that these are the guidelines along with the PIAA that we will be following. Paul, if you go back to our plan, there are some things that are specific because it's our district, and so we need to include those things in our plan. So we talked about the practice guidelines that we will be following from the PIAA, and then hygiene practices. The daily cleaning of equipment and the training rooms will take place in both yellow and green, washing hands before practice. So coaches will actually organize that with their teams. Hand sanitizer, I think, is through here 100 times. Again, we had to have signage. I want you to scroll down, Paul, because this is an area that is particularly, up too far, particularly important to our facilities. Those of you that have students or had student athletes, you know that we have a training room, a locker room, and a weight room. And those areas get very, very congested. And so we have guidelines for limiting the number of students in those areas. If we are under this health plan, whether we are yellow or green, we are most likely are going to have to limit access to these rooms by the athletes that are out of season. So we allow our students to train all year long, to use those facilities all year long, regardless of whether their sport is in season or out of season. That is going to be a big change for our athletes. And this is an area that we are going to have to monitor very closely. Our athletic trainers will be helping us as well as coaches. Questions you have about our athletic plan?
When you had the guidelines up from PIAA, I noticed the whole thing about, like, you can't use any shared equipment. So if you're playing football and you throw the ball to someone, no one can catch it.
I cannot even begin to imagine this.
Was that in the green phase too? The no catching of the ball?
There's been a lot of talk about this today. Today was the first time in all of the conversations. As you know, I meet twice a week with Chester County superintendents and twice a week with the superintendents from across the state. And so today was the very first conversation regarding the PIAA guidelines. And their thinking is that we are going to see these guidelines change the closer that we get to the start of school. So these are the guidelines that they're starting out with. That's why I said I probably am going to be coming back to you every month with changes that we've had to make to the guidelines. Thankfully, this is not so stringent that it does not allow us to make on-the-spot changes. We will be able to do that. So even after the first day, if our plan does not work, we will be able to modify it right there on the spot. We won't need to wait for board approval to do that. The football one is particularly interesting because of the passing of the ball. So there was a lot of talk about, would we be able to have football with that limitation that's in there? So I think more to come on that. These
Okay.
guidelines were only just developed. I think that just like everything else we've seen, once people try to put them in place, then they start to go back to those that have developed, they go back to their legislators, and then those changes get passed on to us.
So sorry, can I scale it back for a second? Because we keep talking about making changes, and I didn't preface this when we first went into everything. So what's going to happen with this plan is the board's going to, we would take it to the board on Monday, and then the board, if the board approves it, then that we submit this to PDE, and we'll post this on the website for the public to see, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Leslie.
And then as we make changes, we'll update what the public sees on the website, and we'll keep submitting that to PDE. Okay.
Right. And then there's training. We'll talk about that training later on that comes along with it. Mr. Friel, did you have a question? Or was it Mr. Melnizak? I'm not sure. I thought somebody else chimed in.
That was me, Dr. Lloyd.
Oh, Dr. Marquis.
I don't have a question for you. I'm pretty
Okay.
satisfied with your explanations. They were excellent. I just wanted to interject though, for the PIAA, you have to keep in mind that starting in July 1st, it's optional training for athletes.
Yes.
The PIAA doesn't actually sanction athletic competition or mandatory practices until later in August. And then for football, for example, they have a week of, very light practice for safety reasons to acclimate to the weather. Then they kind of progress from there. So a lot of what the students would do in the summer anyway would be training, conditioning, drills, things like that, as opposed to lining up and running plays or handling the ball, et cetera. So I think the PIAA, for safety reasons, really want to get the kids out to condition, so there's not a shock to their system when they come in August to start. So give them that opportunity. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for explaining that, because that is exactly today's conversation was about. And so that's why we think come August, there's going to be a change.
Yeah, I also, related to that conditioning aspect, that seems to be extra critical because I saw someone commenting that they believe that their child's temperature gets escalated when he participates in sports. So now, I mean, one can bring into questions of whether that's the beginning of heat exhaustion, and how, there are definitely a lot of concerns if the child's temperature is getting escalated and he hasn't been conditioning properly, or she. But I think, that was a good perspective that we may have to adjust if it turns out that there are quite a number of children whose temperatures get escalated, and we don't want that to have to trigger them to be sent home under COVID rules,
Right.
when it's obviously not COVID related, it's exercise and training related.
One of the thoughts that I just had as we're going through this, I can see one of the very first revisions that we will come back to you with in July is going to be regarding band camp. So our plan did not include band camp, and that is one of the groups that comes in. And so we will be seeking their input on here and including that under most likely athletics. We will probably expand athletics to include band. I think that's makes the most sense.
I honestly had a thought that piccolo players are the most dangerous on the field because they don't blow into an instrument, they blow across it and at a very high rate of speed.
While marching.
Right.
Yes.
All right. I have not.
Kathy's going to laugh because I think both of us played flute.
No, I played clarinet, not flute.
You were clarinet. Okay, I misremembered that.
I I'm sure
I'm
our
sure any
marching band.
day the governor's going to send us guidelines on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll be trying to figure it out. Any other questions or comments about athletics?
Just, it's more of a general question. If someone has a cough or looks like, what's the protocol for sending a kid home or asking them not to come? How, is there guidance so teachers or coaches, have like a strict rule of if they see this happening or that, so it's clear cut and we're not asking them to make medical judgments all the time. Can you just describe kind of what that's training for staff and what the
Right,
guidance?
so let's go to that section next, okay? Because
Oh,
that
okay,
is,
yeah, if they were coming to that.
right, that's the next section,
Good lead
which
in.
is the monitoring student and health. And so I'm thinking, as you're talking to me about this now, that this may be something that we want to delineate out. But let's take a look at what our nurses have been working on this. I think Dr. Marchini will attest since school ended, because remember, they were the ones that started to develop our plan while we were in session. So they have written this portion of the plan. They ran it by our district's doctor, and the doctor gave their input to it. So this is what they have. It is the same whether we are in the yellow or in the green with regards to monitoring students and staff. And so you can see that it just starts out by asking those simple questions about if you have symptoms. Notice that the temperature is greater than 100.4, cough, sore throat, stomach ache, headaches, rash. The nurses are very quick to point out that that fever is not necessarily the indicator of COVID, but there's been a lot of research that's been done, and that is not the #1 indicator for COVID. We will already in advance, and even with our summer program, have identified our students and our staff that are at risk. We will be monitoring we will be advising people to do safe daily self-monitoring. So this is an education piece for our parents that we will need to be pushing out. We're going to be relying on our parents and our staff to stay home, keep their children home, and staff stay home when you are sick, because fever is not that #1 indicator. We're going to need to continue those flexible attendance policies we adopted in the spring. And as the board knows, we will be adding some flexible policies for the staff. We need to identify how we will isolate or quarantine any student or staff that is ill. So each of our buildings, the nurses have walked through with the principals, identified the room where an individual would be isolated. Most of our schools have the room right there in close proximity, and those rooms have doors on them. If they don't have a window, we're in the process of installing windows. Notice the note there that says the use of masks for persons with respiratory symptoms and or fever is recommended if available and tolerated. So once we have isolated or quarantined a student, they will be required to wear a mask, same way with staff have masks anyway. In order for a student or a staff member to return during the yellow or green phase this summer, students will be readmitted after they are cleared by their physician with a medical note. And that students and staff are required to be fever-free that means off any fever-reducing medications for the previous 72 hours, and at least 10 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. Students and staff are required to have improving symptoms, provision of results of 2 negative COVID-19 tests within a 24-hour period.
So can I just ask a quick clarification? So if I get sent home or if I have a cough and then I'm feeling better the next day, do I still have to go get a doctor's appointment? You know, what triggers the
Right, the
if
COVID
parents aren't
testing.
having to take every kid to the doctor, or just
Right.
what do you have to do?
And so that is that cluster of symptoms there, Mr. Friel, that it's not just one, because as we know, and we saw this in the fall when allergy season started, all the coughing that was going on with students, and students weren't being sent home every time that they coughed. So it's the cluster of symptoms there.
So if somebody is sent home with a cluster of symptoms that resembles COVID, but then their doctor says that it's not COVID, do we let them come back if 10 days haven't passed?
And so with their doctor's note, and that's the key part, is that we aren't always very firm on that doctor's note piece. But for the safety of everyone, we're going to have to be firmer on parents getting doctor's notes. But we have extensive medical history on our students. So we know, our nurses know, I shouldn't say we, because that would not include me. Our nurses know our students that have other conditions. And so let's say if we have a student with Crohn's disease, for example, the nurse knows what the symptoms of that is, and that those symptoms differ than COVID. And that's an important distinction. The same way with our students that have asthma, because there's a lot of coughing that goes on with asthmatic students, but that doesn't mean they have to stay home for 10 days, nor does it mean they have to go to the doctor. That is those are asthma symptoms. We are very fortunate to employ registered nurses in our school district who are able to diagnose these things in our students and have conversations with parents all the time, just ongoing conversations with parents about the symptoms. Many of our parents are very good about calling and saying, these are the symptoms I'm seeing. What do you think? And not send their child to school at all. Just like you saw.
I have a question.
Oh, hello, Dr. Melnizek.
Sun was in my eyes. So when do children and teachers and coaches actually get tested? Do they get tested? You know, because there are a lot of students, young people out there who are not showing signs or are showing very mild signs. So, you know, testing has been recommended to kind of be getting a handle on how pervasive it may be in a particular population.
And so nurses will be making those recommendations to families about getting tested. If you think you have the symptom, get tested, it's free. And the same way with staff members, not to wait and see, but to get, now that there's testing available, to get it done. So we didn't have really that in the spring. The testing wasn't available.
No.
Where now we will be able to encourage people, we'll be able to tell them where to go to actually get the testing done. And I have to say, I'm hearing that people are able to very easily get tested now, where they weren't in the spring.
Yeah, people with cars, if somebody does not have access to a car, can they still get tested easily?
That's a good question, but we have social workers that can assist with that. And so our nurses, again, know those families, and we have social workers that can get involved and make that happen for people.
Okay. And also on this section that says provision of results of 2 negative COVID-19 tests spaced 24 hours apart may be requested. We might want a little bit more definition about what would cause those to be requested.
Okay.
It seems rather vague.
Got it.
And it's requested, not required?
That's what we're recommending, is that we would request it,
But not require it?
not required it. Are you comfortable with that, Dr. Melnizek?
Not really, because there's a huge disparity in opinions in the public about
Okay.
COVID-19.
Got it.
There are some people who wear masks and some people who don't, and I'm sure there's some people who say, we don't need a test. He's not coughing. He's not coughing today.
The only question I would have is how easy is it to get a second test within 24 hours? I know right now it's really hard to get the testing done, and I just wonder like how easy it would be if we leave it open-ended with requested and not required. Or you're making it harder for families if it's required.
That was going to be my question, was, is it feasible?
Yeah.
To do so. I'm going to put that, I'm going to note Dr. Melnizek's recommendation, and then I'm going to ask our nurses to go back and find out the feasibility of having that.
Thank you.
I'm also interested in how much it aligns with other schools' practices. Are they going to be requesting 2 COVID-19 tests spaced 24 hours apart?
Right, and I don't know that yet because other
Yeah,
schools
they haven't published
theirs. So I can, as we go into our phase for the fall, we will have the opportunity to see other schools' plans then. The next part is similar to what we saw in the spring, is the requirement of the superintendent to communicate any changes in the protocol. It is also my responsibility to communicate if we have a case in a school.
So communicate changes, would that be any changes made to the health and safety plan, or any just major changes in general?
It applies to both.
Okay.
I think, yes, it applies to both.
Okay.
So then there's some other monitoring screening there, that if a student or staff member does appear ill, that they will be examined by the school nurse. If known or suspected COVID cases, local health officials will be notified. That's a requirement. We had to do that in the spring. That was very beneficial because particularly when rumors started to swirl in the community, if somebody called and said, I heard there's a case of COVID at the high school, we could call and we could get an answer. But doctors are required to call, and we're required to call as well. Staff and families of exposure or confirmed cases will be notified while maintaining confidentiality. We have to promise to remain confidential. If a student or a staff is aware of an exposure to positive COVID cases, they are required to contact the Chester County Health Department. We are required, and they are required to do that. That's the health department's recommendations.
And then they would have to be quarantined for 2 weeks, right?
Right, and then quarantine. We should say that,
Well,
I think, too.
So
oh, go ahead, John.
so I guess if somebody on the football team comes up positive, that means the entire football team has to be self-quarantine?
And so we will be doing that mapping. Our nurses have been trained to do that mapping that you've heard them talk about. So yes, that is a real possibility that the whole football team could end up quarantined.
Contact tracing?
Contract tracing, thank you. I was calling it mapping.
Yeah.
Contact tracing.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would be able to add some wording around contact tracing to this. And the other thing that I saw in a CDC guideline was actually a recommendation that if a COVID case is confirmed, to have a shutdown of the entire school for 2 to 5 days. I don't know if you came across that, because there's a gazillion different recommendations.
Yes, there are.
And so, Mrs. Crumrine, I think that might have been addressed under your section. I didn't pause at that point. I really like the grid view better.
Sorry, yeah, trying to get
It's
myself
important to have the document displayed, but You can't,
Off of-
you're like, where did she go?
Yeah, we just stated generally that it may require the case, when the contact tracing occurs, depending on the path, it could require us to do the electrostatic sprayer in a particular area, depending on the path, or the whole school. We may need to shut the whole school down. And then we didn't really address the number of days that it would be shut down, but that is probably something that we should do. So I think we could add that.
Do you want me to send you the link where I found it?
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. I know that we had talked about that, and that was in our original action plan about that piece of it. All right. I want to do these two parts together, okay? Because this is these other considerations for students and staff that we needed to take into consideration for protecting our staff and students that are at a higher risk for severe illnesses. The board, I believe, is aware that our students that do have severe medical needs, they have medical 504 plans that identify the various accommodations that we make for them. So those students are all known to us. I see it could be possible that we will be having more of those once we return to school, and other students perhaps can't wear masks or are asthmatic and don't want a mask. They don't want a mask put on their child if they were quarantined or something. So again, we will be screening those students. We'll be monitoring those students very closely, but so I'm certain that their parents will be, if they are returning to us. That is the population of students that I think may elect our online academy. But we will work with those, our nurses will be working with those families. This is the part where we address the face mask piece. As I told you, our staff will be wearing face masks and will be wearing the shields. We're keeping people the 6 feet apart. No person can come into the building. That staff that are unable to wear the mask or a face shield due to specific conditions, we're going to need to discuss that with our HR department. And we will not be requiring our students to wear masks. Parents may choose for their child to wear a mask. And Mrs. Munson, we talked about this at the meeting the other night about that students who choose to wear the mask will be permitted to do that, or whose parents want them to. We will have them available for all employees. And we talk a little bit about our IEP and 504 plans, that if we will adjust them if we need to, in order to meet the needs of those students, if we have to. Anything else about this part of the plan? I appreciate your feedback on that. We'll be making these revisions for you for Monday night, and providing you with a marked up version so that you can see that your recommendations were added to the document.
Are there any triggers for closure, school closure, if we find through contact tracing that we have 3, 4, 5, positive connected cases to a building, so if it's connected to a building or to a certain staff interaction or student population, that we trigger? What would trigger? Is there triggering events, I guess, that would say that's it, we're closing because we have 5 cases or 3 cases or
Yes.
whatever the number is?
And so what I know from in the spring, when one of our students, they were doing contact tracing on one of our students, is that the health department notifies the principal, the health department calls me, and we then have to pull together those pieces. Now, our nurses have been trained, so our nurses will be doing some of that contact tracing here at school. Then the health department has a conversation with me about closure. They do not call the closure, the school does, but they consult very closely with the school to say, no, there was no direct exposure for the student or for the adult, or they will tell me there was direct closure, and that's how we're going to know that we have to clean that classroom. And then, as you know, our students move about a building. And so sometimes you will read about just closing and cleaning that classroom and letting that classroom sit for 24 hours. Realistically, our students move about the building, the teachers move about the building. So I could see how we would need to close a building, even if we only had the one, because as we saw in the spring, how long it takes us to then sanitize the school properly.
Well, I guess, and I appreciate the way you answered that question, and but I was more thinking in terms of we have a potential spread, and if we don't close and have everybody not come back in, you have potential folks who have had it spread to them who are now coming back into the building and continuing the spread because it's that chain reaction. You know, at what point do we just go 7 days closure or 14-day closure,
right,
this building, you know, this.
And that would be the decision with the school board, which is what we did in the spring when the school board said, wow, that we have all of this happening in Montgomery County, which is next door. We think it's best for us to close school now and not wait for it to, to spread to our school. So that's a conversation then that we have. As you know, we monitored this very closely. We monitored the number of students absent, the number of teachers absent. And so we will be continuing to monitor that. And I think I'm making a note about the monitoring. It's written in there, but we're going to have some other details to determine, as you said, if we have some community spread that's occurring.
Yeah, I just, just food for thought if we had some criteria that made it easier to make the decision versus on the fly, us getting together on it. If there's any recommendations from the health department or the school district or PDE, not that we want to make it all, make it up ourselves, but just curious how people are handling it and anything that can just make it more of a trigger of, okay, we're now here. We should be alerted to take this as the protocol now. Close for
I will ask them if there is. So oftentimes when I ask them questions, they tell us that it's a local decision. Which, we like local control, but there's just sometimes we really wish they would tell us.
Well, ask them if they can get that answer when they do budgeting.
Yeah. I do have a little information.
Thank you.
The PSBA has a 125 member work group, and they're going to be releasing their report, I think, early next week. I don't have the date in front of me. They are not necessarily tied into PDE, and their recommendations and their work group may come up with varied input that might be very valuable to what we want to look at. That'll be coming very shortly.
If you remember in that document that we received from the governor about the preliminary guidelines, in there it says that within 3 weeks, we would be receiving additional information. And so I think, Mrs. Booth, that we are going to be receiving additional information from multiple sources, PSBA being one, that all of the groups, they call them the P groups, were working together to put out guidelines. So I think we will be getting lots of different guidelines. which
Yes, we will.
calls for another revision, Mrs. Prophet.
Right.
So, to make that efficient, Susan, is there any way that we could help? This is a living document in
Right.
what I'm hearing, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
to allow you guys to kind of move and then come back and just affirm the changes that you make per the guidelines, so you can continue to update your protocols and update your stuff. Is there just food for thought as we bring this to the board, to build the fact that it's a living document, that you will be making edits, and then you'll come back to affirm it, so you're not waiting each time? Yeah, and I don't know how the other board members feel about that, but just
I think that a good place for that, Mr. Friel, is up on the very first page. You don't need to go there, Mr. Sanfran. But I think that that's a really good place for us to add that information, because that's where we put the date of the plan. And so I think we can put that information there that says that up front about it being a living document, and will be revised as we go. These next.
So here's another question to give you an ulcer. So a child.
Did you say give me an ulcer?
Yes. So a child is an elementary child turns out positive. Are we still using the same bus to transport kids then to middle school and the high school? And so then there goes, and we closed 3 buildings down.
Exactly. Yes, that is exactly what would occur.
Is there any way to? I know it's probably not. The answer is no. Is there any way to keep buses more separate, so at least we don't get infection between buildings?
There is. Mrs. Kermine, can we talked about how we changed the way that we were sanitizing buses last spring, and the wiping down of buses.
Right. At this point, and this is not for yellow, right? For green, it's that's a bigger consideration. We could possibly, for when we're in yellow during the summer program only, take a look at that. Like, I think that's worth taking a look at, because we will be transporting many, many less students in the summer. So we can.
Yeah, I think John brings up a really good point there. If we can somehow mitigate transfer between buildings, that's a huge win. If in fact, unfortunately, something happened there. Same with transportation of sports teams. If they're doing anything where we're using that bus and doing that, if it's wiped down before or after that, somehow to mitigate the cross contamination of, building to building transfer, that kind of stuff. So.
Right. We'll have one elementary building, and then we'll have the main campus. So, like I said, I think it could be feasible in the summertime, but when we move to the fall, it will not be. I know that it will not be feasible to do that. We'll have to look at that and how many. That's our next step, and we'll definitely take a closer look at that. But
so we delayed your ulcer to the fall.
Thank you.
And I hear antacids help with the COVID anyway.
Yeah.
For the summer, ESY programs have a staggered start for the summer, which they'll have different buses. So 8 o'clock for the main campus and 9 o'clock for the elementary school at French Creek. The plan was to sanitize, wipe them down after the runs, between runs. So we could isolate for ESY, for the summer programs, we could isolate the elementary from the main campus.
Right.
I have a funny feeling that they're going to have a different route for middle school than high school too, or a different bus. So they're trying, because of the numbers,
Right.
It might work out that way. But hopefully, with that plan, we can isolate the elementary from the main campus.
For sure. And I really do believe there's a lot of specialized transportation anyway. So I don't.
Agreed.
Definitely doable for the summer.
I had one more comment that wasn't transportation. It was the last line on the previous slide where it was talking about using, there it is, plexiglass office panels or shower curtains. I was in an office where the heating and cooling air system was significantly impeded when they tried to put in some difference in the cubicles. So yeah, we'll just have to be really careful that we're not changing our airflow when we do that.
And some of that work has already begun.
Good.
So we will start to see that in the next couple of weeks in the office areas. And then I know in Dr. Marchini's department, they've special education supervisors have identified other areas where we will be adding plexiglass. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
These last two sections are brief. They will be expanded as we continue. That we have to identify the training that we will be providing and who will be providing that training. So everybody will be receiving the COVID-19 prevention, and everybody has to be trained on this plan so that they understand what to do if they have symptoms or if students in their class have symptoms. So we will be training. We also have other training that we're going to do with coaches that needs to be added since the today's information. Our maintenance staff, I didn't include this on here because our maintenance staff is and housekeepers have already received their training. I wrote this plan as going forward, not going back and trying to capture what we already have done as far as training goes. And then the last section just has to do, we have to include a communication plan and how we are going to notify parents and stakeholders. And so this is our beginning of how we see that rolling out here for just the summer. And I'm sure that it will be expanded as we go as well. So that is the draft that we have. Now we've captured your input. Any other thoughts about this before we move this, before Mrs. Prophet moves it forward to the whole board?
Anyone from the committee? I think it's John, Jennifer, and Kathy.
It looks like a lot of work that went into that.
He will just be continuing that. Mrs. Prophet, you had asked me the other day, you and Mrs. DiMarino, about other school districts in ESY. So today when I was on the call with the superintendents, I did poll them. The IU will be starting July 6th. We have Westchester will be doing their in-person, will start July 6th, and so will Phoenixville be starting their in-person as well in July. A lot of this has to do with when their board meetings are. So because we have, our board meeting is later than all of theirs, we're going to see the same thing as I mentioned with sports, where some school districts will be starting later than we do because they've already had their board meetings. And it's, it's quite challenging to put the plan together to get input from folks on it.
Yeah, and you know what, I just want to say I really commend you and everyone that's been on this group to get all of this information pulled together so quickly. I think everything released, what was it, June 3rd, that we could start on July 1st, and now we're a week out and we have a plan together. I think that's an awesome teamwork right there.
Here, yeah.
What I would,
Agreed.
and it doesn't need to be a conversation for tonight, but it does need to be a conversation that we have about developing the plan for the fall and how we go about soliciting input for that plan. As we, from my, as you know, I surveyed parents, and some of you were in that survey. And so I know that we have parents that are going to want online in the fall, and Dr. Soder is working on that piece of it. We also, in that survey, had parents that wanted to be able to have input into the plan that we would develop for the fall. So I think that we need to come up with a format for engaging the community. Different school districts are doing it different ways, using the technology that's available to us to gather that input from parents. I think we're going to have to survey our parents again. I mean, we're going to need to know specifically who is interested in online. Many parents are willing to transport their children in order to reduce the number of students that are on buses. They recognize that it's not feasible to have one student in every seat once we return. So we need to, flesh out those ideas. So we should really talk about how we're going to make this happen to get community input.
So I'm just going to throw out there. I know Rich has had some great ideas on community input. Unfortunately, I don't think we can do individual groups with the Zoom meetings right now. But I do recall at one point you had mentioned like a listening session or something. And I don't know if that's something that we feel like would apply here, so that the public can come out and express their concerns on certain things.
Well, I'm sorry. Somebody
No,
start.
that's right. We had mentioned for different venues, listening sessions. It really isn't an expectation that the board or the administration has to defend a plan or comment or anything, but simply give folks a chance to make comments about what they feel is important, their priorities, experiences, things like that. And you usually do those in smaller groups where you go around to maybe some of the elementary schools for parent groups, things like that, or create different Zoom groups if you wanted to. So it's a pretty effective way to collect a lot of anecdotal data quickly.
I was listening to the Downingtown superintendent speak, Dr. Lenardi, and what she did is they have multiple Zoom rooms and people registered in advance to participate. I think they were doing it by topic. You can see how big the plan is, and that we're going to need input on all those different things. And so she started that before this plan came out. But what they did was, my point is that they had multiple Zoom rooms, and in each of those Zoom rooms was a board member and an administrator and a recorder in each of those rooms. And then theirs were by themes when they did that. We have the technology, because our license is through the Chester County Intermediate Unit. We have the ability to have multiple Zoom meetings going on at a time. So I don't know if that's something that appeals to all of you, or if you prefer everybody in one.
I think it's going to be a lot of people, so I think we're going to have to break it up. And I like that idea.
She said.
I participated. I did participate in a Zoom meeting run by the CCIU. It was about wellness, and they had a big group for the introduction, had everybody go into breakout rooms that were manageable size, I think maybe 6 of us per breakout room, and then come back for the conclusion. And then like Dr. Lloyd said, there was a person who was like a facilitator and a person who was taking notes. So someone represented each of the groups then back to summarize what the breakout room conversations had been. And it worked well in that situation.
I would just ask that, and I think this is a really good approach to doing that, to do breakouts in the smaller and facilitated discussions. But if we have a discussion guide by topic that has structure to it, where we have actionable data that we're collecting. So if we're trying to, understand the impact on childcare to parents in elementary school, times of day that people have availability, if they're going to transport their children, yes I can, but I need to be here and here. Just that we have specific data points that are going to be informative and actionable to the plan as we go. So maybe some thought on just what data is required by topic that would be good for the school district to have, and then a facilitation guide as we break out into these things. So it's not just free form of like ideas, but it's a structured discussion that's led by, whether it's board and staff on there. I think that's a great idea to bring us all together and collaborate. But I just think that planning and what is the output that we want from those meetings in terms of the data, if we could give that some structure and thought.
And also, just to that point, Paul, I'm thinking, should we look at facilitating this after ESY is in full swing? Because if we are making changes to our current plan, that we want to kind of give some time for that, to see if there were big changes, see what those changes needed to be before we start dialoguing about the next plan.
So when do other programs start, like kinder camps and things like that? Because that's going to be, different populations and things like that. So just want to understand how we can get that data too, on how
Mhm.
to do them.
So,
think August.
Chair, Kinder Camp starts in the second week of August, and Jumpstart starts the last week of July.
Okay.
Okay,
Kinder camp might be a little too late, but
yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
I think Kathy Dubrino's idea is very good, that we let this get started so that we do have some data from the results of even the short time we might have been getting kids into school, so they would be able to have data with us while we had the breakout sessions. I think would be a really good method to move forward.
Do you think this is something we could achieve in 2 sessions? If
In
we
two
had
sessions, breakout rooms?
if
Yeah.
we had the first one would be the listening, and then the second one would be more the action.
I think you're going to, I think you can, Susan. I believe that you have to use structure to it, but watching focus groups, albeit in like a corporate setting, I think you can accomplish what you want to accomplish and collect the information you want to collect if you do it. If you have an idea of what information you're trying to collect and can facilitate and guide that so you're arriving at a point that you want to arrive at, right? So I think it's possible. I do think you need to add structure to accomplish that and ensure the scope that you have of that is contained within that room that you're trying to discuss, so it doesn't balloon up wildly, but it's narrowly focused to a topic and a reasonable set of options that exist and are constrained by the reality of where we are and the CDC guidelines.
I think we also need to make sure, just from what we've experienced with delayed start, we need to make sure that we're putting out material beforehand, just so that people have time to read it and understand what they're walking into. Because I will just say, I don't feel like people read the information for delayed start, and it was a really tough conversation. So I think making sure we put everything out there ahead of time. And I know the plan will be on the website, but just making everything really accessible so that, parents can be prepared.
I agree. I agree that it's important to know if we do it by topic, that people need to know that what they're signing up for. I like the idea of people registering. The benefit of people registering is that we can then email them the link. We don't have to put that out there, because that's the concern about Zoom is the Zoom bombing that goes on, but Zoom is the one that gives you the most flexibility. Plus we have the license that allows us to do multiple rooms at one time.
Yeah. So just so we have the next action. So I think we should, as a committee, look to meet again in maybe early July and decide if you think that's correct, when we should have these 2 breakout sessions. And I like the idea of registering ahead of time, and then kind of make sure we have enough parameters of what we're looking for each session from the community. If the rest is okay with that.
Sounds
We
good.
will put together a plan, and then we'll share it with you guys in advance so that you can provide input into it. We have to research how the technology would all work too, because that sending people into Zoom rooms is slow. If there's a lot of people, and Downingtown had 600 people, so I think there'll be a lot of interest in this.
If we have people register, are we going to limit?
Well, do we limit or do we just find more facilitators?
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Right, right, because when you think of how many, while there's only, you know, the 9 of you, there are many, we have many administrators. So, well, let's see what we come up with, okay? And we'll talk, I'll talk more to Downingtown about how they made that work.
Okay. Does the committee have any other questions or feedback?
When do you think the revisions will be put up after tonight's conversation, Dr. Lloyd?
Did you ask me if I would put them up tonight?
No, I said when.
In 15
No,
minutes.
And not within minutes, but within, days.
We will get them we will get these up tomorrow.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, we will get them up to-
So this is going to be added to the agenda for Monday's meeting. So
Right.
it'll be an attachment in
Right.
the
Right.
meeting.
We have to have it, yeah, we have to have it for tomorrow, so that it's part of the agenda, so that you can see it and digest it.
Yeah, I think it's best that we don't have changes after the agenda goes out.
No,
That-
I'm going to take
that's
your
great.
input.
Okay.
I just have to add, I also have to add the names of the teachers that provided feedback to us on the plan, update that information for you, but we will not then be taking now any more input on the plan from teachers or
Okay.
anyone. So, my phone is dinging because that's Dr. Marchini telling me we need a motion.
I know, I was going to
Yeah.
ask for one. Yeah.
I was going to jump in there too.
So
I
can I
move
get
that
a-
we take this to the full board,
Thank you.
the health and safety plan to the board on Monday night.
Second.
Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Who's
All right.
crying?
So I think we're good here. Only other thing was, I did say that I would open it up to the public for any questions. I do want to remind the public that we have asked that any questions be regarding this health and safety plan at this point in time. Monday is another great opportunity for public questions. I'm going to actually mute myself. Maybe
Oh, that's.
I'm going to mute myself.
That's maybe at
Paul,
your house.
if there's anyone with questions.
Give it a second, but no hands are raised.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we
All
need
right.
to walk people through where to raise their hand, just in case?
Oh,
Go to participants.
sure. So go ahead,
Okay.
Mrs. Munson, give those directions because I do see new names on here that I have not
Right.
seen at our other meetings. So go ahead and give those
so-
directions.
At the bottom center, you should see something that says participants. Once you click that, a pop-up screen should show that has a button called raise hand. On the computer I'm on, it's at the bottom right, but if you're on a iPad or iPhone, it could be a slightly different location.
So I'm
But
not
raise hand.
not
if you're
seeing
interested.
any. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the board. And then also Monday is another great opportunity to ask questions too. All right, then I'm gonna adjourn this meeting. Thank you everyone so much for everything with this plan. I'm really excited for our kids to go back to school.
All right, good night, everybody.
Welcome.
Night, night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much.